Hello and welcome to session number 18. As always, am Mr. Fowler. I'm so happy to be able to bring this video message to you today. First and foremost, for today's session number 18, I was not made aware, but today was another maintenance window for Kishwaukee College. So that is unfortunate because this was right during our development week, where I did not want anyone to be thrown off or have questions. They have to update once a month on Thursday, and today was that Thursday in July. I should have been a little bit more on top of that. So if you were not able to find access today, my apologies. As always, if you should have some questions about what went on today, do not hesitate to ask me via email or just drop me a line through the chat, something like that. Okay, let me go ahead and share the screen for a moment. Stop my video and share the screen with you all. So this is the 18th session. And as you can see here, today we are going to review the argument essay prompt, look specifically at page 3. Then, during our main time, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the skills that 7 specifically I want to Let's look at what we're going to deal with today. Next, I'm going to share this document. I'm going to explain. So then we've been looking at this essay for this entire first week, and today is no exception. Just in case this is the first time you're looking at a video related to this topic, I'm going to run through very quickly some of the basics. The argument essay is about 26%, or roughly equivalent to your last essay, your analysis. But it's a little bit bigger, 1,250 words or more, which is subsequent to or comparable to about 5 pages in length. It won't be 5 full pages, but it will be closer to 5 than it will be to 4. Let's put it that way. You get 100 points for the project total, 50 for the draft, 50 for the final. Standard format, except this time you have to utilize 4 sources and format them appropriately with either a works cited page in MLA or a references page in APA. Of course, there are a few distinctions between the in-text or parenthetical citations along the way also, but I think by now you should have at least a passing familiar with one or the other format, hopefully with both. In this assignment, you're going to demonstrate your ability to develop a thesis as a direct response to one of the larger issues we discussed in this semester's reading. First, you're going to develop a persuasive claim and look for some support while following the structure of a college level argument. And here are the essays that you could read and respond to as part of this project. I'm going to minimize just a little bit here. So you could read about the addictive use of social media and video games and the symptoms that they might contribute to psychiatric disorders. And then ask yourself, does social media affect the development of a healthy self-esteem? Does it affect our ability to communicate clearly? Does it have an impact on our social life? We talked about characters in Ready Player One dealing with stereotypes, whether that was Wade, the central protagonist, Samantha, or his best friend H. How did stereotypes affect those? What are some common stereotypes that they may have encountered? What types of defensive mechanisms did they use to deal with them? And how were those stereotypes eventually overcome? For those of you who may be IT, business, or gamer focused, MMOs have generated a very large market for goods that are purely virtual. And consumers will pay real-world money for these virtual weapons and clothing. In Greengard's Social Games Virtual Goods, he discusses how virtual goods obtain real-world value and explores the risks and rewards of setting up a business selling virtual goods. You might want to write about that topic. If you're more interested in the health profession, I would direct you to option D. Wade mentions a sedentary lifestyle in chapter 19, commenting about how it begins to catch up to him. Start by defining the word sedentary and then describe potential health risks associated with those lifestyle choices. Does our time in virtual realms, whether it's the fictional oasis or the very real internet, time spent playing a video game or watching your favorite television show in a binge marathon, affect our physical health? Does that physical toll impact our mental health as a result? And what can we learn about healthy choices based on Wade's approach to his own problem? Lastly, for those of you who may be interested in either the environment or education, you could take a look at Matthew Simmons' Shocks of the System and explore how our hunger for energy consumption continues to spiral out of control even today. Then, if you're interested in education, maybe reviewing Saba Osvast's Ready Learner 1 might be interesting. You could then jump from Saba Osvast's thoughts and ideas to explore the questions of how virtual education discussed the novel differs from today's online coursework. Which of the two teaching models do you think provides a more authentic learning environment? How could these models more closely simulate experiences in face-to-face classrooms? And is that something we should even try to do? I'll be eagerly awaiting your response if you choose that option. Now, lastly, if none of these options really float your boat, you may want to propose an alternative topic as seen here. All I'm asking for is 5 to 8 sentences addressing a concept from the book that you would like to write about in a lengthier, extended format. So if that's an option for you, it's available. Now, we talked last time about how to access and limit the focus of our research using the databases offered through the Kishwaukee College Library. Today, I'm going to focus on phase 3 and 4. So after you've read one of the articles that you've selected, and you've completed a little research finding at least 2 additional suitable sources that meet the peer-reviewed journal criteria, you should formulate a yes and or yes but response to the concepts. So you want to take the author's primary claim from your initial reading. Could be Andreessen, it could be this idea of stereotypes. It could be Greengard's piece. It might be the book itself. It could be Simmons' article, Shock to the System, or maybe even Sava Osvath's piece. And I want you to develop a yes and or yes but response. Now, either of these responses is perfectly fine for the assignment. A yes and is an agreement. So you would say, for example, yes, Matthew Simmons has a really good point about the way in which we seem to be addicted to fossil fuel consumption. And furthermore, I have the following to say in order to add to his thoughts. By contrast, you could say, Matthew Simmons presents a very interesting argument about the nature of our relationship with fossil fuels in the United States. But he misses a very key aspect of this relationship. And then you would go on to explain why you may not necessarily agree with his perspective. Once you've developed that, you're ready for the actual writing, which will start next week. Compose an essay that introduces the topic and thesis of the original author, then presents your thesis and supports it with claims and logic. Now, regardless of what your topic might be, the outline will look something like the following. You're going to start with a summary of the issue at hand, creating a topic sentence, or maybe even two, that clarifies the issue. In Article X, the author claims the following. So, sticking with our example, in Shock to the System, Matthew Simmons claims that the United States is dangerously focused on the consumption of fossil fuels to sustain our economy. And then you go on to elaborate. Another important part of the author's argument is, and a third, and so on. Last of all, you transition to your perspective. And you reserve your thesis for the beginning of the second paragraph. That's a little bit untraditional, but I think that you would benefit from thinking about where you place your thesis in a more flexible manner. You may want to try it out. I'm not telling you you have to, but it might be a different and fun way to think about how to organize your final essay for the semester. You drop your yes and or your yes but thesis claim here. And then you begin to introduce the claims in order to prove your point. Once you've done that, you go back to claim one and provide the reader with your first piece of evidence that supports it. Try to support your logical ideas with authoritative support in the form of a direct quote or an indirect reference. You may also want to consider using a piece of in-text evidence from Ready Player One itself to illustrate your point. Then, once you've done that, you transition back to claim two, again expressing why your thesis is true in the first place. You repeat this pattern for claims 2 and 3. Then I would suggest, and we're talking about this in class on Wednesday, that you anticipate a counter argument. And what I mean by that is that you should pause in the writing process long enough to look for or consider potential vulnerabilities in your argument, the weak points, and then address them. Or as we said in class, explain why the other side of your perspective may have good points, but then elaborate on why they're still wrong. Once you've completed that, I would repeat your conclusions and transition to the final paragraphs of the essay. Here, you simply restate your thesis summarize your claims, and then draw the essay down to a close. Now, I think that if you're able to do these things, you're going to be much more successful in the long run than if you were to start off with a random claim and build off of support. This way, I think you'll not only sustain a longer, more cohesive argument, but I also think that you're going to get a little bit more out of the process of writing, and you're going to be able to create an argument that's more well-defined, uses better evidence, and appeals to your reader in a much more comprehensive way. So we'll see what the results are. Now, I'm going to transition back real quickly to our course. You're going to see me up in the corner here. Here I am. Okay. So today I want to talk a little bit more about team dynamics. Specifically, I want to answer the question how Wade repairs his relationship with H. And then I want to ask a couple of questions. Why is teamwork important? How does teamwork function in the workplace? And have you ever had to reach outside of your comfort zone to make an alliance work for a project, either in school or on the job? If so, what strategies did you use to meet your goals and contribute to the overall success? So, real quickly, how does Wade repair his relationship with H? At the beginning of chapter 21, Artemis makes an incredible breakthrough. So we discover that in chapter 21, Artemis finds the jade key. She cracks the code. Now, we find out that a half an hour after Artemis's name goes to the top of the big scoreboard in the Oasis, that the Sixers move in, and they take up positions in advance of the other Gunters. And they try to lock the jade key out using a force field. So he is really limited. He does understand that Artemis had last been in Sector 7. So he knows wherever the clue is leading him, it's somewhere within Sector 7. So he makes a guess that it has something to do with a classic arcade game. And he chooses the planet of Arcadia to find such a game. There he goes to a recreation of a bowling alley that Halliday loved as a kid. And he finds a Pac-Man video game cabinet. It has Halliday's top score. So Wade invests a lot of time and energy trying to beat Halliday's high score on Pac-Man. And he's successful. But he only receives a coin for his trouble. He takes a false lead. It's not the location of the jade key. In chapter 22, we discover that the bromance between himself and H is not as damaged as he'd once suspected. On page 224, he goes back to his ship after having received the coin from the Pac-Man challenge, and he gets a email called Payback Time. It's from H, and he's a little bit worried. But when he opens the email, it says that, "Dear Parzival, you and I are officially even now. I consider my debt to you hereby paid in full. You better hurry. The Sixers must already be on their way there. Good luck." And below his signature was an image file attached to the message. It was a high-resolution scan of the instruction manual cover for a text adventure game called Zork, the version released in 1980 by Personal Software for the TRS-80 model. So he is given a heads up by his good friend H. And it's interesting to note that the repair of this relationship is at a cost to H because he's paying back a debt. And we know that from our discussions about the nature of collaboration and from social science that humans thrive and do better when they are socially associated with one another, that they're more successful, or their tendency towards success increases incrementally. So H comes through in the clutch, and Wade makes his way to the planet Frobaz. There on Frobaz, he completes a version of Zork, which is a text adventure game a little bit in the vein of Oregon Trail, which is probably more well-known than Zork, but Zork is a fairly well-known game of this style. After he completes the trials in the House of Zork, he is granted a whistle, and the whistle drops a force field around the trophies. He's able to collect the trophies that you earn throughout the play of Zork. And then he realizes that he has to complete another test. And once he earns the Jade Key, there's a clue etched inside which reads, "Continue your quest by taking the test." But he's not quite sure what test is being referred to here. And then something really shocking happens. It says that Daito's name is eliminated or erased from the board. So either one of two things has happened. Either his character has been killed or zeroed out by a Sixer, or he has himself been killed. And unfortunately, the latter is true. Unlike the film adaptation, Daito actually is murdered. IOI finds out who he was in real life, just as they had done earlier with Wade, and they deem him enough of a threat to attack, and they end up throwing him from a high balcony. So Wade, of course, goes directly to his friend, Shoto, to see what happened. In the meantime, Frobaz is cordoned off by IOI again. And it's really looking bad for the Sixers. We find out in Chapter 25 that Daito has been killed. Shoto, or Sho, as he's referred to in the film, really is upset about it. He explains that he was thrown from the 43rd floor of their apartment building. And Wade realizes that the stakes are higher than they've ever been. So we see the result of the fragmentation of the high five come to a real tragic end. And this, again, provides extra motivation for H, and I would also argue for Artemis, to realize that there needs to be some sort of repair of their collective. Because without it, individually, it seems that they are not strong enough to stand against the corporate forces of IOI. He realizes that the test is a reference to a book called Do Electric Sheep, or sorry, Do Electric, I lost it. Do sheep, or do androids dream of electric sheep? I knew sheep was in there somewhere. Do androids dream of electric sheep? Which is actually the basis for the film adaptation Blade Runner. So he knows that the famous test in the Blade Runner is the Voight-Kampff test. It essentially tells you whether or not you're a robot or a real person. And he goes into the office of the character from that film. He enters another flick sync, essentially, and he takes the test. He takes the test to prove he's not a robot. So we've seen in 2 instances now a rejection of this sort of mechanical thinking that the test is posing against the players. The first one, of course, comes from the challenge for the copper key. He's not going to merely let the lich determine which side of the cabinet he's going to use to play. He makes a conscious decision. He shows thought, original thought. This is repeated when he completes the Voight-Kampff test and again proves, just as in the film, that he is not a robot, which unfortunately for Decker, if you've ever seen the film adaptation of Blade Runner, is not the result that he wanted to get. We find out that Deckard really is an android himself. That's why he's such a good Blade Runner. So he escapes the Tyrell building using the Voight-Kampff test and enters the final portal. And there he finds himself in a recreation of James Halliday's childhood home. Excuse me, I misspoke there. James Halliday's childhood hangout, where he would go when his parents were fighting. And there he must complete a 3D version of a 2D arcade game called Black Tiger. And this stresses Wade's physical prowess to its extreme. So it ends up being a very fortuitous chain of events that he had trained himself to be physically ready to adapt to the challenges of Black Tiger. A very difficult game by any account. Now that he is finished with that challenge, he says on page 258 that he saw a new addition in the end credits, a 5-pointed star inside of a circle that he realizes right away as the cover to the Rush album 2121. And he even says, I felt a rush of adrenaline. I always thought that was funny because I recognized the star symbol and knew what it was meant to lead, where it was meant to lead me. And then he takes off and he heads right for a special planet within the Oasis called the Syrinx. And the clues from the liner notes of that album read that we are the priests of the Temple of Syrinx. Our great computers fill the hallowed halls. All the gifts of life are held within our walls. So he already knows this clue. But he makes yet another curious decision. He notes that he probably isn't going to be able to complete this quest unless he recruits enough sufficient help. And that means he sets a series of actions into effect that will put him directly into harm's way. But if his plan works, he and his fellow Gunters may finally be able to combine their efforts and defeat the forces of IOI. So that's what's waiting for us next week as we start chapter 28. Okay, so real quickly, back to our session. I ask, why is teamwork important in life? Again, I would say that teamwork is important because more often than not, as social creatures, humans tend to do better exponentially when they work as a group or within a collective society. That doesn't mean that there's no space for individual thought. Quite the contrary, as the book points out. However, collaboration usually results in a better end game for all parties. Then I ask a question, have you ever had a chance to work outside of your comfort zone? Or maybe you were required to do so for a work project or a school project. If so, what strategies did you use to meet your goals and contribute to mutual success? This is something that we can take up next week, and if you want to add it into the discussion forums, that'd be a perfect way to take care of that question as well. Then last but not least, we've got our weekly discussion question. So you can look at that for this week. Number 3 out of 3. And as you can see, I just want you to free write for 15 minutes about the possible topics you are considering for the purposes of the argumentative essay. So this one's really loose and really loosey-goosey, but sometimes that is a welcome change from the standard norm. And you've already had more than enough to write about this week. All right. Okay, so when we get together again on Tuesday of next week, we'll discuss chapters 28 through 32, kind of the important elements that happen that shape the key distinctions between the film adaptation and our original text. And I will give some space over to students so that they can talk about these kinds of collaborative efforts that they've had in the workplace or in school as part of their transition in the past. Until then, this is Mr. Fowler bidding you a good day and an even better tomorrow. Take care, folks.